It is interesting that all these extremely complex objects are classified by official science as religious buildings. Let's look at the unexplained cutouts on the mountain in Sri Lanka. On a granite cliff 180 meters high stands an ancient fortress. According to an ancient chronicle, this area was once a large forest, which then turned into a hill due to storms and landslides, and was chosen by King Kashyapa as his new capital. He built his palace on the summit of this cliff. On a small plateau about halfway up the slope, he constructed gates in the shape of a giant lion. The fortress is officially dated to the 4th century AD. But here, we can see two radically different approaches to construction. The first thing that stands out is the enormous amount of brickwork. According to some sources, around 3 million bricks and 3,000 marble steps were brought up to this mountain, and all the structures were built with them. But there is another aspect. We see carved pools in the rock. Over 3,000 tons of granite were extracted from the summit alone. This object is unique in its kind. Against the backdrop of primitive stonework, it looks like something foreign. But the most interesting features are found below around the cliff. There are unexplained traces scattered everywhere. Similar features were previously seen near caves in India. Rectangular indentations that at first glance resemble stair steps. However, from other photos, we can see that these elements don't actually help with climbing. They are scattered everywhere without any visible logic. And they are carved into granite. Creating so many of them must have required considerable effort. There are other intriguing places as well. The upper part of the stone is cut and polished. Notice that a small piece resembling what we saw from above remains. Its style doesn't match the roughly made staircase nearby. It seems to be part of something entirely different. There are also reservoirs made of large granite blocks, each with a different shape but perfectly fitted together. On the decorated upper edge, we see the same shapes. Now let's look at the main attraction here. At first glance, it seems that the lion's paws are made from a single piece of granite, which is what tourists are told. But let's look at an old photo before restoration. We see that the brickwork behind was covered with plaster, which created the smooth surface. On the paws themselves, where the plaster has fallen off, we see the same bricks. I understand it's hard to see, but there is no single piece of granite here. Modern restorers have done their usual excellent job. We're fortunate that such rare old photos remain. So, the main attraction in the form of lion's paws is just a tourist attraction. There are no complex ancient technologies in stone processing here. Lastly, let's view Sigiriya from a distance. You can notice a line running along the cliff from above. From this distance, it seems like natural layers of granite, but what if we look closer? It turns out this line ends abruptly and has a rectangular shape. It also sharply descends somewhere down. Such a cut cannot be natural. It was made artificially and is on a sheer cliff at a great height. At first glance, this cut has no practical application. I have no ideas about why something like this was made. Let's discuss this in the comments. I tried to find other photos from this angle to better examine the place, but I was unable to do so. In the caves of Barabar Hill, we can again see a strange discrepancy. These are considered to be the oldest rock-cut caves in India, dating back approximately to the 3rd century before our era. In chambers with walls polished to perfection, you can find scratched inscriptions. These are dedicatory inscriptions on behalf of King Payadasi and Devanampiya. According to the official version, it was during their reign that these caves were constructed. Let's take a closer look. Perfectly polished granite, in which you can clearly see your reflection, with inscribed texts on it. Just like on the sarcophagi in Serapeum in Egypt. These aren't the only peculiarities. These structures have an unusual internal layout. The Lomas Rishi cave consists of 2 rooms, a rectangular room and a circular, hemispherical room, which can be accessed through a narrow rectangular passage. The Siddhama cave is located on the southern side of the Barabar granite hill. It has a similar structure. The interior walls of the cave are perfectly smooth and polished granite surfaces, creating a mirror-like effect. On the other hand, the flat surfaces reflect sound, producing a very pronounced echo effect. This cave is also dated based on the scratched inscription at the entrance. These 2 caves are located slightly higher up, on the northern side of the hill. The Vedadika cave is situated in a crevice in the rock. It consists of a single rectangular room. Inside, there is an inscription stating that this refuge, which will last as long as the sun and moon shine, was excavated by Devanampiya, the beloved of the gods. No specific mentions of the cave construction have been found. Nearby is the Vapiyaka cave with a similar structure and inscription. On the same rock, there are carved steps that do not serve their primary function. The angle of their incline does not facilitate climbing the rock. If they were capable of working stone with ease, why did they not make proper steps? Let's look at the cave studies using a 3D scanner. The results showed extremely small errors in the construction of the circles. The rooms are designed with incredible geometric precision. Just look at the presentations and reports. We are left with the same question as in Egypt. How did ancient masters measure the accuracy of their work? And most importantly, why did they strive for it if the structure had no practical use? The methods used in polishing the stone surfaces could have a local origin, citing the existence of various highly polished stone tools found in the area dating from much earlier times, in the Neolithic era. There is, however, no trace of evolution from these Neolithic objects to the polished stone architecture of many centuries later, and the Barabar caves are essentially a sudden technological break with no local history. Let's look at Afghanistan, Takht-Erustam stupa. This structure, similar to an ancient bunker, is located in Afghanistan, 3 kilometers from the city of Samangan. It is considered a Buddhist stupa, a monastery built around the 3rd century AD. When Buddhism came to these territories, this giant domed hemisphere, carved directly into the limestone rock, reminds me of the so-called churches in Ethiopia. As in Ethiopia, you can get to the foot of the stupa through a passage below. But what is interesting is that there is no entrance directly into the stupa. It is either solid inside, or the entrance is only from underground. There are roughly carved caves in the rocks that surround the stupa. The element in the form of a superstructure on top of the stupa is called harmika, and the harmika here is one with the hemisphere. This means that the builders had to remove the entire rock above the superstructure. According to legend, each stupa contains some part of the Buddha's body, or a relic that belonged to him. However, there is an opinion that this structure was made before the Buddhists came here. In essence, it is very different from traditional stupas and is unlikely to have had the same purpose. The current name means Throne of Rustam, the Persian king who ruled here in the 7th century AD. Now look at this photo. I don't know about you, but I'm almost sure that this door was not in the original design. Just look at the 2 symmetrical sections, the quality workmanship, and some awkward hole made in the wall. Someone was obviously just trying to find treasure inside a completely sealed structure, and quite possibly found something. We can see traces of vandals from different eras here in many places. Here, someone tried to cut into the main structure. As we can see, unsuccessfully. Nearby, there is also a platform of large blocks, which was clearly part of something larger. The blocks were fastened with metal ties. We have seen similar fastening methods on many megalithic structures. Here is a completely identical mount. But this is an Osirian in Egypt, and according to the official dating, there are at least 1,700 years between the construction of these structures. Let's move to Bali. There are many amazing temple buildings with a unique architectural style. However, I am afraid that many of them have been decorated and restored in the last few decades, and old photos of these temples are very difficult to find. But what I have no doubts about is that the oldest of the so-called Gunung Kawi temples has remained virtually unchanged. It is widely known as the Valley of the Balinese Kings, an 11th century temple and burial complex. These structures are believed to be dedicated to King Anak Wangsu and his beloved queens. Already at the entrance to the territory, we are greeted by a neatly cut piece of rock. Why make such a trench in the rock if you could just make steps on top? This tunnel ends in a rectangular passage, and beyond it there is a view of the main structures. 10 rock-cut shrines, which are carved into several protected niches 7 meters or 23 feet high. The top of the arches appears to be crooked. But this is only because part of the rock has collapsed, ruining the original shape. This entire complex does not have a single hint of Hindu or any other deities. There is not a single inscription or any other identifying marks in this temple. And yet, an incredible amount of rock has been removed to create the courtyards and all these sculptures. The idea remains unclear. Here we have such a beautifully carved niche in the rock, a vertical slit 4 meters high, made as if by a circular saw, and finally, there are simply dozens of such interesting constructions. We are now at the bottom of the largest stepwell in India. The Prabandhachintamani, composed by the Jain monk Marudam, mentions that Udyamati, the daughter of Naravara Kemgara, built this new stepwell in Sripatane, surpassing the glory of the Sahasralinga reservoir. According to the text, the stepwell was commissioned in 1063. Later, the well was submerged by the Sarasvati River and silted up. By the end of the 19th century, Henry Cussons and James Burgess visited it when it was completely buried underground, with only the well shaft and a few columns visible. In 1986, the Archaeological Survey of India conducted extensive excavations and restorations. If we look at a standard Hindu temple, we can understand that Rani Kivav is an inverted temple, like a Hindu temple turned inside out. Its dimensions are approximately 65 meters in length, 20 meters in width, and 28 meters in depth. The fourth level is the deepest and leads to a rectangular reservoir. The entrance is on the east, while the well is located at the far western end and consists of a shaft with a diameter of 10 meters and a depth of 30 meters. The stepwell is divided into 7 levels of stairs leading down to a deep circular cavity. The entire structure is divided into equal intervals by multi-story pavilions with columns. The walls, pillars, columns, brackets, and beams are adorned with carvings and scrollwork. Niches in the side walls are decorated with figures and sculptures. There are 212 columns in the stepwell. Now, take a closer look. This is true craftsmanship. There is no talk of high precision here. The elements are only roughly parallel. The patterns are asymmetrical. The figures, although complex in shape, are all different with no standardization. There are no straight lines. There is only rough polishing. The walls are made of blocks no larger than a few meters. One might assume that this is a rough restoration, but all the statues and ornaments are made with such quality. I specifically mentioned this structure in this video to show that with a huge amount of manual labor, such colossal objects can be created. However, regardless of skill and the number of people involved, it is impossible to make columns like these without machine processing. The 10-ton basalt columns in the Huashan temple, for which machinery was likely needed to rotate them at high speeds, result in perfectly round columns with high-quality polishing. All columns are identical to each other. Understanding this difference in the required technologies is crucial. There is a significantly more perplexing underground structure, even larger than the one we examined in India. It is located in the closed city of Zawiet el-Erian in Egypt. The photographs taken before the research ban show completely stunning structures and traces of a grand construction project. Scientists and researchers are unable to visit these sites. The necropolis area has military buildings, and the site of the unfinished pyramid has been turned into a landfill. The current condition of this structure is unknown. The pyramid is attributed to Pharaoh Baka of the 4th dynasty. Betris is the Hellenized form of his name. However, there is no reliable archaeological evidence for the existence of such a pharaoh. Italian archaeologist Alessandro Barsanti began studying and excavating the pyramid in 1904. The research was repeatedly interrupted due to the complexity of the work, lack of funding, and World War I, and it ended in 1917. Barsanti died without completing his work. Nevertheless, he made several unusual discoveries. The descending corridor is 100 meters long, 25 meters wide, and 30 meters deep. At the end of the corridor is an underground chamber. The walls, corridors, and chambers are carved from the limestone plateau. When Barsanti started clearing the corridor, he first encountered roughly piled limestone blocks. But beneath them was a paved floor made of large limestone and granite blocks. There are 4 layers of blocks, with a total height of up to 5 meters. This is what the lowest layer of blocks looked like. Here, there isn't a single identical block, yet they fit together perfectly. Let's take a closer look at some of them. For instance, this block has 9 sides. And what about these small inserts? Can you imagine how labor-intensive this work must have been? The most important thing is that it is absolutely useless. If these builders were skilled at working with sandstone and granite, they could have made the same floor with identical rectangular blocks. This would have required significantly less effort. The largest blocks weigh over 40 tons. Beneath this layer, at the bottom of the pit, Barsanti found a unique granite block polished like a mirror, with an oval basin carved into it. It was tightly covered with a granite lid. The lid was covered with a layer of lime, underneath which was a layer of clay, sealing the vessel very tightly and hermetically. Barsanti himself wrote that it seemed as if this block was deliberately hidden deeper with all the other stones. All the precautions taken made him hope that the contents would be the most valuable. But when the interior of the vessel was revealed, Barsanti found it completely empty. Again, we see this strange pattern. Most sarcophagi turn out to be empty. Here, we cannot blame tomb robbers, considering the layer of blocks above this container. Barsanti noted that the side walls were covered with a black stripe 10 centimeters high. This was probably a very thin residue of some liquid that was poured into the basin and evaporated over time. Some of his companions suggested that this reservoir was an unused sarcophagus, but Barsanti did not think so. The meticulousness with which it was protected proves that there was something in it, and the dark residue indicates the nature of this content. If it had been empty at that time, it would not have been hidden under such a massive amount of blocks. The blocks in the floor were tightly and logically fitted together like some kind of puzzle. Under the first layer was the next layer of blocks, and all of this went to an unknown depth. Barsanti spent many years trying to remove these blocks one by one, attempting to solve this puzzle and reach the chambers that he believed were beneath the layers of stone. In total, he removed 426 tons of stone. One day after a heavy rain, the pit was flooded to a height of 3 meters. Closer to midnight, the water level suddenly dropped by about 1 meter. Barsanti immediately realized that the water had drained into underground tunnels, large enough to hold 380 cubic meters of water. It was to these voids that he had been trying with all his might to reach in the last years of his activity, but he did not succeed. Let's take a look at the unique ancient underground structures in China. A group of large artificial caves in Longyu. They were discovered by accident in 1992. There was a local belief that the lakes were bottomless, so a local resident decided to pump out all the water to test these rumors. When the water level dropped significantly during the pumping, entrances to ancient underground structures became visible. Today, there are 24 separate, non-communicating chambers. Considering their technological origin, the size of the caves is substantial. The height of the chambers reaches up to 30 meters. The total volume of rock removed during construction amounted to at least 1 million cubic meters. The technology used for these excavations remains unknown. However, the interior of the caves is not characterized by high precision in processing, and it is also possible that ancient builders simply expanded an existing natural cave. This explanation resolves some questions, but not all. There is conflicting information regarding the drawings in one of the caves. It is said that they were left by restorers to attract tourists. Additionally, no traces of human presence have been found in any of the caves. The ceilings, walls, and support columns of the caves are covered with signs of rock removal. They feature rows of parallel grooves approximately 60 centimeters wide, formed by marks left by tools. The direction of the grooves makes an angle of about 60 degrees with the direction of the stripes. Each cave is a vast chamber shaped like a funnel, with a narrow entrance and a space that widens from the entrance to the far wall. 3 walls in each cave are strictly vertical, while the 4th wall slopes at a 45 degrees angle. In each cave, the vault is supported by 3 thick pillars hewn from the natural part of the cave. According to experts, the Longyu caves were excavated more than 2,000 years ago. However, scholars still cannot reach a consensus on the history and purpose of these caves. No historical records have survived, and no ancient artifacts have been found inside the caves. In 1999, an even more fascinating structure was discovered in China, the Huashan caves in the cliffs of southern Anhui province. The same marks can be seen on the surfaces of the ceilings and walls. The rock is filled with numerous step carvings of various shapes and sizes, often located in places where they seem completely useless. During the cleaning of the caves, ceramic artifacts were found and dated by experts to the Jin dynasty, around the 300s AD. It is possible that some artifacts could have been brought here long after the caves were constructed. There are dozens of different caves in this complex. The scale of this structure is astonishing. However, there are no records or mentions of the creation or use of the Huashan caves in any chronicles or historical documents. Another oddity: when the caves were cleared, no traces of fires or soot were found on the walls. How did people light these spaces? Write your versions in the comments. Thank you for your interest in ancient structures. Please subscribe to my channel for more content like this.